Today we're diving into a movie that most people barely remember, but once you start digging into it, it's honestly wild how much was happening behind the scenes. We're talking about the Gypsy Moths, the 1969 skydiving drama starring Burt Lancaster, Gene Hackman, and Deborah Kerr, directed by the legendary John Frankenheimer. On the surface, it's a story about three skydivers drifting through small-town America. But behind the camera, there were real jumps, real danger, ego clashes, creative risks, and a whole lot of emotional intensity. So buckle up, here are 20 hidden facts about the Gypsy Moths that you probably never knew. 1. Burt Lancaster did his own skydiving. Burt Lancaster was in his mid-50s when this movie was made, and instead of relying entirely on stunt doubles, he insisted on doing many of his own skydiving scenes. And not just simple jumps, we're talking about legit parachute work. Lancaster had always been athletic. Before Hollywood, he was a circus acrobat. That background gave him confidence in physical stunts, but skydiving in the late 1960s was still incredibly dangerous compared to today. Equipment wasn't as advanced. Safety protocols weren't what they are now. He trained seriously for this role. This wasn't just strap on a chute and hope for the best. He worked with professional skydivers and put in real effort to look authentic in the air. And that authenticity shows in the film. When you see his character Mike floating over those Midwestern fields, that's not movie magic, that's Lancaster actually up there. At a time when many stars would have played it safe, Lancaster went full commitment. 2. The film was directed by a master of intensity. The director of the Gypsy Moths was John Frankenheimer, the same guy behind The Manchurian Candidate and Grand Prix. Frankenheimer had a reputation for realism and tension. He loved shooting on location. He loved technical challenges. And he loved pushing actors emotionally. By the time he made the Gypsy Moths, he was coming off the high-energy spectacle of Grand Prix, which featured intense racing sequences. So instead of race cars, he turned his focus to parachutes. And just like with the racing film, Frankenheimer wanted real footage, real speed, real sky, no cheap backlit tricks. But his intensity didn't always sit well with the cast. Frankenheimer was known to be demanding, sometimes brutally so. And that leads us to some behind-the-scenes tension. 3. Burt Lancaster and John Frankenheimer had clashed before. Here's something interesting: this wasn't the first time Lancaster and Frankenheimer worked together. They had previously collaborated on Birdman of Alcatraz, which was a major success. But during that production, they reportedly clashed over control and creative decisions. So when they reunited for the Gypsy Moths, there was already history there. Lancaster was a powerful figure in Hollywood. He wasn't just an actor, he had producing power and strong opinions. Frankenheimer, on the other hand, wasn't the type to back down easily. Their working relationship had moments of tension, but they also respected each other's talent. That tension may have actually helped the film, because the Gypsy Moths is filled with emotional friction, and sometimes that energy mirrors what was happening off camera. 4. Gene Hackman was still climbing the ladder. When people think of Gene Hackman, they think of The French Connection or Unforgiven. But in 1969, he was still building his reputation. He hadn't yet become the powerhouse star we now recognize. The Gypsy Moths came just 2 years after Bonnie and Clyde, which helped put him on the map. In this movie, Hackman plays Malcolm, a more grounded, family-oriented skydiver, compared to Lancaster's restless thrill seeker. What's fascinating is watching Hackman before he became Gene Hackman. You can already see the intensity, the subtle emotional weight, the quiet frustration in his performance. This film sits right at that turning point in his career, just before he exploded into superstardom. 5. Deborah Kerr took a risk with her role. Deborah Kerr had built a career playing refined, composed women in films like From Here to Eternity and The King and I. In the Gypsy Moths, she played a bored, emotionally repressed Midwestern wife drawn to Lancaster's character. The role had sensual undertones and emotional vulnerability that were edgier than many of her previous performances. For audiences used to seeing her as elegant and proper, this was different. She wasn't just a romantic figure, she was conflicted, lonely, and restless. That shift showed how much Hollywood was changing in the late 1960s. Characters were becoming more flawed, more complicated, and Kerr stepped right into that evolving era. 6. The skydiving scenes were extremely dangerous. Today, aerial shots can be enhanced digitally. Back then, it was real or nothing. The skydiving team had to coordinate camera rigs, jump timing, wind patterns, and landing zones, all without modern GPS tracking or lightweight GoPro cameras. Cameramen literally jumped out of planes with bulky equipment strapped to them. One wrong move in the air, one tangled shoot, and things could go very wrong. The production relied heavily on professional skydivers to pull off complex formations. And even with all that expertise, every jump carried real risk. When you watch the skydiving sequences, there's an authenticity you can't fake because they weren't faking it. 7. The film was based on a novel. The Gypsy Moths was adapted from a novel by James Drought. The book explored themes of freedom, masculinity, aging, and emotional detachment, all wrapped around the world of traveling skydivers. The screenplay kept much of that introspective tone, which is probably why the film feels slower and more character-driven than audiences expected at the time. It's not just about parachutes. It's about men drifting through life, avoiding commitment, and confronting their own mortality. 8. The title has a deeper meaning. Gypsy Moths isn't just a cool phrase. It refers to the way the skydivers drift from town to town like nomads. Like moths drawn to light, they perform dangerous jumps for small-town crowds, collect their pay, and move on. There's something poetic and sad about it. They live for adrenaline, but they don't build roots. The title reflects the film's deeper message: freedom comes at a cost. 9. It captured a changing America. Released in 1969, this film landed during massive cultural change. The Vietnam War was ongoing. The counterculture movement was in full swing. Traditional masculinity was being questioned. And here's this movie about men who define themselves through risk, toughness, and emotional distance. It almost feels like a commentary on an older generation struggling to adapt to a new world. That tension between stability and freedom runs throughout the film. 10. The ending shocked audiences. Without spoiling too much, the film's ending is not triumphant. It's sobering. It's tragic. It doesn't glorify the thrill-seeking lifestyle. At a time when audiences often expected heroic finales, this movie delivered something heavier. That bold choice divided viewers, but it's part of why the film still lingers in people's minds. 11. Real skydiving culture was portrayed accurately. Unlike many Hollywood films that exaggerate subcultures, the Gypsy Moths took time to portray the skydiving community realistically. The jargon, the camaraderie, the risk-taking mentality. Actual skydivers at the time respected the film's attention to detail. 12. Frankenheimer used long takes in the air. Frankenheimer loved immersive filmmaking. Instead of quick-cut editing, he often used longer takes during the skydiving sequences to make audiences feel like they were actually falling. That decision increased tension because you don't get relief from rapid edits. You stay in the moment. 13. The film wasn't a box office hit. Despite the star power, the Gypsy Moths didn't perform strongly at the box office. It was too slow for thrill seekers and too intense for casual viewers. Sometimes movies that sit between genres struggle to find an audience. 14. Burt Lancaster identified with his character. Lancaster was known for playing strong, confident men, but he was also aging in Hollywood. Mike, his character, is a man confronting the limits of his body and his future. There's a layer of realism there. You can feel Lancaster bringing something personal to the role. 15. The Midwestern setting was intentional. The film takes place in small-town America, not big cities. That contrast between quiet farmland and high-risk skydiving makes the danger feel even sharper. It's not Vegas. It's not Hollywood. It's everyday America watching men flirt with death. 16. The movie explores male friendship honestly. The dynamic between Lancaster and Hackman isn't glamorous. It's complicated, competitive, loyal but strained. For 1969, that kind of emotional male friendship wasn't always explored so openly. 17. It reflected the end of the old studio era. By the late 60s, Hollywood was shifting toward grittier realism. The Gypsy Moths sits right at that transition point, starring classic-era actors, but dealing with modern themes. 18. The aerial cinematography was revolutionary. Shooting coherent skydiving footage in 1969 was a technical nightmare. The production pushed camera technology to its limits. That innovation paved the way for future aerial action films. 19. Critics were divided. Some critics praised its emotional depth. Others thought it was too bleak. Over time, it's gained more appreciation as a character study rather than an action film. 20. It's now considered an underrated gem. While it never reached blockbuster status, the Gypsy Moths has quietly earned respect among film historians. It's a fascinating snapshot of late 60s Hollywood caught between old-school stardom and new-wave realism. And honestly, watching it today feels like uncovering a lost chapter of cinema history. So there you have it, 20 hidden facts about the Gypsy Moths. It's not just a skydiving movie. It's about aging, risk, freedom, masculinity, and the cost of living on the edge. If you enjoyed this deep dive, drop a comment and let me know which classic film you want next. And until next time, keep watching the skies.